Yeah, so very, very welcome to everybody here in this webinar. At first, I'd like to thank Mathias Tölken and Mark Geschke to present us again this KPPM. Some of yours had taken part in the very first presentation on November 2nd this year. And this is a follow-up. I think today we go more in depth. We see more the practical side of this KPPM. And everybody's welcome also to, at the end, to ask question or comment in the middle of this webinar. You could also pop in with the chat, but I think we have a slot at the end and can go into details. You will receive also, members of PMI, the claim code in the middle or at the end of this webinar in the chat. So I don't want to bother you more on this Nicholas Eve, and just hand over to Mathias and Mark. Please go ahead.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mathias. Vielen Dank. Also from Mark and myself, a warm welcome. It looks like we always have our webinars on special days. Last time we did it, it was World Project Management Day. Today it's Santa Claus or Nikolaustag. I personally know it as a thing that's in the morning, so I didn't have that much of a problem in the evening, but I heard a lot of you, well, a lot of people are really looking at that in the evening. So thanks to everybody who's here. Yeah, let me quickly say a bit more about us and share my screen very quickly. There we go. Now you should be starting to see my screen. I just need to take the controls away here because they are sitting obviously in the middle of the screen. There we go. I think now you should have it correctly. Great. So a quick few words about us. You would have read our bios already, so I don't want to bore you a lot. But you can find the details also on our website, xuviate.com, or on LinkedIn. This is a main page of our website. Xuviate is next year's, it is 30 years that Mark and I are business partners. We founded our first joint business in 1994, actually, as second-year engineering students. I'm giving my age away there probably with that, but I'm an industrial engineer. Mark is an electronical engineer. And that first business we built for about 20 years to about 70 people and sold it in 2015 to found Xuviate. Xuviate itself is a business that really specializes in helping organizations efficiently implement project portfolio and multi-project management using Kanban, using Kanbanize by Businessmap. Many of you would know it by Kanbanize. They are changing over name to Businessmap, and using the KPPM that we are talking today about. In the last 4 years alone, Xuviate has been very privileged. We've been quite privileged to accompany over 300 leaders and change agents in 20 plus countries across 6 continents on their Kanban journey. We are also mostly working remote at this moment. I actually live in Stellenbosch near Cape Town, and that's where I'm sitting at the moment. That's why you see me in short sleeves and sweating. It's about over 30 degrees here. And Mark is sitting in Wachtberg near Bonn in Germany. But I think that's enough of us. I just want to do a quick bit of housekeeping here. And that is, this is the Zoom screen about, well, you should see it. Obviously, you at the moment see the 3 of us there. Or you see my screen and you see me there if I'm sharing. So one thing, this is a webinar, so you will only see us. You won't see each other, but you can still interact with us. The one thing you will see there is that there is a chat button. Most of you would already have found that. We just now said, please put this or that into the chat. This is where you can chat to each other. We can chat to each other. And whilst Mark is doing most of the presentation, I'll also keep an eye on that. I, however, want to ask you that if you've got specific questions, please put them into the Q&A, because there's 2 or 3 things specific with the Q&A. First of all, I'll find the question, because if there's chat, it sometimes gets lost, whereas in the Q&A is specific to it. But what's also specific to the Q&A, if there's a question that you think is the same you want to ask, just give it a +1 or an upvote, then I see which questions are mostly wanted. And secondly, you can also comment on it. So you can have a bit on the specific question, say, yes, I want this, but I also want to see this of that question. So you can do that. And we'll, as Mathias already said, we'll at the end have about 20, 30 minutes of session, but we'll in between, Mark will make breaks, and where necessary or where sensible, we'll have a few discussions in between. You will see in the middle, there's a raise hand function. That one we will not be using today. We are just really only need that if we are going to give you a voice. If there's a question that we want something more, it might be that we want asking you to unmute. You will then, in this case, at the left-hand side where the audio settings are, you will start seeing an unmute button where you can then unmute yourself. I doubt we will do that, but it can be. And last thing, we will do a survey at the end. I'll say that at the end again, but we are planning a monthly webinar series like this, and we would like to get your input and pick your brain about topics and speakers that would interest you. You would see that today, for example, has been a session that comes directly out of the previous session. We had Theodora Bajeva here, the actual author of the KPPM method. She told us a bit, and then people came back and said they want to know a bit more. Like Mathias earlier on said, they want to know a bit more practical. And that's what we are doing today. So whatever you give us in feedback, we will take in there. But that's enough of me. Enough of housekeeping. Mark, all yours. I'll stop my share, and it's all yours to take over.
Thank you, Mathias. Also, stop the Miro presentation, please.
Yes.
Otherwise, I can't start it. So also very warm welcome from my side. It's always a little bit scary if you have to show something live, but today is really about getting to grips a little bit with how this KPPM actually looks in practice. But for those of you, I've seen the question, what it is, do you have, is it necessary for you to have been there in the previous session? No, it's not. Certainly somewhat helpful, but the last session was really quite a lot about the theory, and today is not about the theory at all. It's about the practical application of this KPPM model. So what is this? A little bit of a review also for those of you who have been there in the last session. So this is not another project and portfolio management method. You don't have to forget everything that you're currently doing in order to do something new. It's a collection of principles, practices, and cultural values. It helps to resolve some of the really most common challenges, improving outcomes, guiding evolution. Essentially, it's going to make you better at managing multiple projects. So it's not a replacement of what you have, it builds on top of it. How does it do that? So you've seen the book in the beginning. There are also supplementary materials, like for example, this poster, the KPPM poster, with quite a lot of detail on also in terms of topology, how you can convert it into Kanban boards so that you visualize the project work at different levels. And already here looks fairly complicated. But let us start with why it is that we actually would consider implementing something like KPPM in our organization, and that is that there are problems. Now, this list of problems, if you go through, it looks like a laundry list of problems you would find in the project management industry. There's almost always a lack of visibility and synchronization. There's delays, workload beyond capacity, unclear changing priorities, metrics are inappropriate, wrong estimates, poor decisions, and then at the bottom, we're just slow. We can't change fast enough. Demand is coming at us faster and faster. We need to move faster, and somehow we struggle to do that. And of course, KPPM offers and says, okay, well, we are going to change all of that. If you adopt what we bring you, if you use these tools, etc., you can expect all these results. And this is just a clear opposite of all the problems that you've just now seen. And at the end of this presentation, I hope that you will at least in part be able to agree with me that some of those deliverables, even though they sound like far-fetched, because almost everybody promises you those results, and you implement something and do something and you don't get them, But I hope at the end of today, you're going to have a better understanding what it is actually that KPPM brings, and that it's not that far-fetched as it might look. Because if you look at this laundry list of things you're going to get if you implement KPPM, it looks like magic. Wow. Everybody wants that, of course, but it's difficult to believe that any tool, any assistance can really get us there, because we know that complex project management is complex. Now, if you want to implement this, there's a lot of guidance in terms of the practices that you can build on top of your current project management environment. And that's probably then would have been better suited for last session, where it's more about the actual, the meat, the theory, etc. It's enough here to say that there are different evolutionary levels. You see them on the left-hand side. So you mature from a very immature team using KPPM to a very mature, high-performing team at level 4. And across the various practice groups, there are quite a lot of things you could do in order to achieve a certain level of maturity. And these are very actionable items. You should do visualize teamwork priorities, etc. So all very, very good, but it can be overwhelming. And I think just with that very short introduction, you've probably gotten the idea, wow, this is actually a lot of work. Where do I start? Yes, I want the benefits, but where do I start? This is exactly the reason and the problem that, well, the problem that we have identified out there, that so many project managers, project leaders, PMO leaders, etc., really struggle with these challenges. They want to do whatever it takes in order to get those results, but they have no idea what it really is that KPPM brings to the table, because it just looks like a huge amount of work. So we've developed over the last almost now a year now, we've developed a simulation which takes the KPPM thinking, all the theory, and puts it into a 4-hour block that you come to, so that you can go through a simulated environment where you see multi-project using the Kanban way in practice. So after the 4 hours, you leave and you have a very good understanding really what this KPPM thing is, so that if you decide to start implementing it, you're not going in blindly. And that has been very successful. We've been running these simulations now for a long time, many different scenarios. And it's quite interesting that out of running these simulations, we started realizing, you know what, we can actually throw away quite a lot of the theory initially. So the first stage, when we're starting to engage with a topic, it's not so important to know about the theory. We don't need to read the book. We can actually go back again to this poster, and here's something hidden that I have not shown in the first instances. And there's the KPPM principles. And I'm going to use today's session to go through the principles in a very much practical way and see that if you believe, so if you go through that list of principles and you believe them and you start working according to this principle, so that's really what you adopt together with some tools, etc., and you pull whatever is necessary in order to achieve something. But if you work according to these principles, you can actually discover all the things that need to be done and implemented over time just by following through in that thinking. And I want to show you how that can be done, which is why I'm going to start with the first 2 principles. So, okay, let me start with principle visibility and focus and show you what that would mean. I'm going to talk about the other 3 a little bit afterwards, but it all starts with visibility. So for those of you who've ever seen Kanban in action, you know that Kanban is about putting some sort of card somewhere in the visible space. Perhaps it might be a whiteboard and sticky notes on that whiteboard, or these days some sort of monitor. But we want to move work across some sort of workflow. And for that, we need to visualize it. So here at the top, the visibility, that's a starting point. And the second point that I almost want to run at the same time, talk about at the same time, is we want to focus our actions on customer needs and the business purpose. These are principles. We want to focus on visibility and focus on actual customer outcomes. And for that, I want to switch over now to the simulation board. And in here, I want to start with probably something that you all agree is of value to customers, which is projects. So typical scenario, we start the beginning of the year. In fact, I'm going to take you through a simulation in certain instances. Our simulation has the capability that we can save it at different stages. So I can pull out all those different saved instances to illustrate a certain point. And by means of the simulation environment, I'm going to illustrate some things you can do with a tool, Kanbanize. So Mathias has already spoken about Kanbanize, because in the end, you need to have some sort of way to bring the theory into practice. So for us, these two scenarios, the theory and the tool go hand in hand in order to achieve the outcomes. So you're going to see a lot of Kanbanize, but it doesn't have to be in Kanbanize. It can be any tool that actually has the same capabilities. And what is very important is that it allows you to see a hierarchy of outcomes. Now, one of the most important outcomes that anybody is going to care about is a project. Okay, so we want to get projects done. And here's a typical scenario where we have a couple of projects that this organization starts with. In fact, there are 60 projects distributed across 3 different project managers who have to do the work. And I'm going to just pull 3 of those projects into the work queue and just close the rest. So what is this now? This is a card. If I could just open one of those cards, we call it a Kanban card, which essentially is just a high-level container for a project. So in a work breakdown structure, that sits at the top level. That's the project. And you have quite a lot of detail. So ignore this detail. That is what we need for the simulation. In here, you would describe what the project is about. You would perhaps have a deadline which you fill in, the size, perhaps there's some tags that you need in the environment, etc. Normal fields that you would have when you think about your project. Of course, there are lots of other things that you could put on here, but that is not so relevant for now. What is very important is to realize that this project is going to have to go through some sort of workflow. And this is a Kanban workflow. And the Kanban workflow always has this thing that it starts on the left-hand side, and it has the project or the item that we want to complete has to go through this workflow, through planning, execution, some sort of closure process, and complete it. Now, I currently have 3 columns, 3 stages that this project has to go through before it's completed. It could be 5, it could be 10, whatever your organization's current project management process mandates. And we all have it. We have some sort of definition as to what these individual columns are. So for the simulation, it's good enough to just know, okay, when it's in planning, when we're actually executing the project, when it's in the final closure stages. And the goal is to move that project to complete it. Now, by virtue of this workflow and indicating the status of a project, we can always see which project is closer to being finished. So let's say that project 1 is in closure. Whereas project 3 is just an initiation phase. We are getting the teams together, perhaps getting some budget together, whatever is part of that particular process. And because we're using Kanban, Kanban is very, very strong on you need to visualize the entire process and also document the policies of those individual stages. There will be some information as to what does it mean if a project is in this stage. So this is all documented as part of our process. It's usually a discovery process where you say, okay, well, what is your current project management process? And we just visualize that on a Kanban workflow. Now, because we're working with Kanban, it's very important. Ideally, these 3 projects we want to see in this stage. They all need to be completed. Okay, together with the other projects that are there. Now, because we're starting at the beginning of the year, we probably have done some planning. And this planning, in this instance, there's a planning view where we have all the different projects for project manager 3 now. And we can see when a project is scheduled to start, when it's scheduled to finish. And in the end, the system will help us track, has a project started, when was the actual start date, when was the actual completion date. We can have dependencies between the projects. I just didn't put that in because, like most planning, we don't really have a good idea when something will start at that level. But it gives us the first view as to, okay, well, we start the first project for project manager 3 early January, and hopefully the last one by in September. We have a little bit of buffer, so we should complete all our projects in the first 60 days. Okay, I don't want to focus on the planning view at all. I want to come back to the Kanban view of the individual projects. Now, this already provides an overview. So imagine you have 30 or 40 projects on the go. Instead of seeing them in one long list somewhere in Excel or whatever tool you're using, seeing them on such a board distributed across the various phases of your project management workflow already provides a lot of value. But probably not enough. We need to now break it down to the next level because ultimately somebody has to do that project. which is why I'm going to open another workflow. This is a workflow now for the project managers who are going to work with the project. Now, these project managers, they need to do some sort of project work breakdown, perhaps a work breakdown structure. Perhaps it's done in Microsoft Project or whatever tool you use it, perhaps an online tool like Miro, where you'd have some brainstorming, figure out what are the high-level deliverables. But there's a very good chance that you're going to take this project and break it down into the high-level deliverables, which is exactly what I've done now. And by the way, what just now happened is a simulation software in the background that has done the work for me. Now, this is not practical. This is not how it would do. Obviously, there's a lot of work when you start the planning process for a project. But in the simulation, that is done for us so that we can talk about the actual concepts of running project management in a Kanban tool. So now this project, which was previously in initiation, has now moved into planning. There's some automation in the background, and we notice that there are these little rectangles, these 6 rectangles. They signify these 6, we call them child cards. In Kanbanize, in reality, they are now the deliverables of the project. So this project 1 has 6 deliverables, and obviously they will have names that are now representative of what the work is that needs to be done. To keep it simple in a simulation, we talk about the project name and deliverable 1, 2, 3, etc. You'll also notice that these deliverables, they have colors attached to them. So there's an orange, there are 3 orange cards, 2 purple cards, and 1 yellow card. And this is to help us understand where does this work need to go to. So essentially in the simulation, we've got 3 different teams. We call that team Orange, and team purple and team yellow. And this brings us into a classical multi-project scenario where you have shared teams who have to deliver work on multiple projects for multiple owners out there. So these 60 projects have to be done by these 3 teams. And the teams could be as diverse as engineering, research, and legal, or marketing, or whatever teams are needed in order to deliver some outcome. It doesn't have to be 3 teams. It could be 10 teams, because there are perhaps 10 teams in your organization working together on a project, and they each have different deliverables. Some of those teams may be outsourced, so other companies providing the work, suppliers, etc. Now, the project manager's workload is, okay, I do the planning. This has now been done at a high level. So that's the first level of breakdown at a high level. And then, of course, working with individual teams to continue doing the breakdown. So what are the work items for the orange deliverables? What are the work items for the purple deliverables and yellow deliverables? So essentially, these cards have to be released to the teams. They have to do the work and ultimately get the work done. For the project manager to, at some stage, get this card back again so that the work has to be validated. Okay, so some work has gone out, it's gotten has been completed by the team, and when it comes back again, it has to be validated until it gets completed. Okay, now this is again where we want to have the project manager's work flow into. It should be in the completed part of the board. So again, Kanban from left to right. What you would have noticed now while I did that is this one item changed color. So in fact, I repeat that, I go back again there. So first of all, the initiative, the project stands in planning. As soon as we start working on the first item, we'll see it actually moves into execution. There's an automation in the background that does that. And we see that this card has changed from blue to orange, signifying it is in progress somewhere in the system. And when this card moves to green, to the last stage completed, moves to green. And we can immediately see on this project also of all the work items. So based on the estimates of the sizes, we've now completed 22% of the project. It's a very visual indicator as to where the project is at the moment. Okay, but we're not at that level yet. We first need the teams to do the work. So for this, we take all these work items, deliverables, put them into this column, and now an automation happens in the background that we usually set up in Kanbanize that distributes the work to the individual teams. And I'm going to open up a team board. So I said we have 3 teams. One of them is Team Orange. And I've just opened up the Team Orange board, and we see the 3 cards that you just now saw, the 3 orange cards in that work breakdown, the deliverables. They appeared in a workflow that has been designed for Team Orange. Now, again, it's a Kanban workflow, and this card, this deliverable, has to flow through all the individual stages until it's completed. Okay, but now it's at the level of the team. So what was previously a project has been broken down into work for the 3 teams. And the 3 teams now need to do their planning, because at this level, it's still very high level. We can't do much with it. It needs to be broken down into actionable work items that the individual team members can work with. Okay, now how is that done? Let me just simulate another day that you. Now this work item goes into planning, and suddenly it has another row of cards attached to it, so child cards. And we find those child cards in the 3rd level, the 3rd layer of our simulation. Now think of this as project and projects as the top layer, broken down into deliverables, and every deliverable again broken down into work items. So in the work breakdown structure, we now have 3 levels. It could be more complex, but this actually suffices to explain how KPPM works in practice. Now at this level, at the work item level, this is where people do the work. This is where the marketing experts is, where the design people, the researchers, whoever the individuals are who have the knowledge in that team to get the work done, they would now get quite a lot of work items. And in fact, I'm going to take these work items and just move them into the next column so that they can pull from it. And they start working on it. Now, how the work is currently not that important. I'm just going to run the simulation to actually show you how these cards from this Q column are being pulled. Again, the same principle. We want to see the cards move from left to right. That same thing. It's always going to come out again. And we see as these cards have now been pulled in, quite a couple of things now start happening on them. Now, again, it's the same card as a project level card, the same details. And this would now contain the actionable work that needs to be done at the lowest level. We'll also see who's pulled the card. So this was Oliver who just pulled the card. And we see that there's some work to be done. There's a subtask which we have to click on in order to complete. So one of those subtasks actually was completed before I clicked on it. And this could be any number of subtasks. So there might be 3 things that needs to be done to that card in that particular work item step. It's some sort of execute, something needs to be done, let's say design. We don't really know. It's also not relevant to be very specific. I mean, marketing people, when they design a campaign, they will have specific activities related to, we need to make a video, and for a video, I need to do X, Y, Z. So those could be subtasks. When all these subtasks are done by the execute, by people who do the work, it gets put into the execute done column. We call that a Q column in Kanban, where that work is waiting for the next step in the process, which we call validate. It's some sort of quality assurance test. So you do some work and you check that the work has been done. And in this process, it's actually different people doing the work. So they will pull this work now through that. Again, we want to complete it. Now, one other thing that has now popped up is that you see that some of those cards, which are in progress, have a blocker on. Now, a blocker is a signal in Kanban where we communicate widely, okay, we cannot continue with this work. And as soon as some work cannot be worked on, we want to let others around us know that this cannot be worked on. If we look at the deliverable, at the deliverable level, we see here the deliverable itself, we see quite a lot of the child cards, and 2 of those child cards now have a blocker on because there's some problem. And this is how this information can now actually be distributed in the organization, and you can now quickly figure out, okay, what is the problem? How can we solve it? So I want to continue running. I just want to show you what happens now if some of those cards actually get pulled into validate, and they get into done. And as we do that, we see here at the top, the deliverable, these child cards, they change from orange while they're in progress to some of them being completed. So there are a few which are completed and a few which are still in progress. And if I continue this process, So there's a blocker now. This blocker has to be resolved at some stage. Let's see, the blocker actually has been resolved. Cards are flowing across the board. Sometimes it appears to be jumping around. That's just an artifact of Kanbanize itself. It cannot really handle us interfacing with it so fast. It's not something that you would normally do in reality. We're actually pushing quite a lot of changes through Kanbanize in a very short period of time. In reality, of course, those cards would move a lot slower, and you would always see them moving from left to right. That's a very important principle in Kanban. Now, all these child cards of this project are completed, and you see that this deliverable has just moved from execution to closure, one step closer to being completed. And now what has happened is, if I click on this, we see that there's another card. If I open that card, it tells me that's a validate. So the deliverable is now in the stage where it needs to be validated again by somebody. It's not done by the team. So we're now communicating outside the team. And in fact, we see that where this card lives on the program management board, which we originally had to look at in the project management workflow for project manager 1. But let's just directly go there. Let me just open the use locate and come to the board. And we see that in the project manager's workflow and validate deliverable, we now have a task for this particular validator. Now, a validator could be a customer representative, a product owner, could even be the project manager who now has to figure out, okay, well, we told the customer we would be doing this. Have we actually achieved that? And there are some tasks to do again as a project manager or validator, and it may be that some problem is discovered. Now, if that happens, we can go and say, okay, we create another child card. I create a child card, which we call, okay, there's some sort of fix required. There's an issue, we change it to the type fix. So every card in the system can have some sort of type so that you can understand what type of work is it that we're looking at. It is for Team Orange. We just create the card. So now you will see that this validate card has links to a parent. So this is a deliverable on the team board. And it has links to this fix card, which currently is in a requested state. So it has a blue icon. It has not yet been started. And the project manager now, of course, has to communicate with the teams. There is a problem. This deliverable can't complete. We can't actually finish. Please do something about it. And again, passes that on to the team so that it appears on the team's board. So previously we had a look at all the project work items, but now we see there's a work item. The fix work item has appeared in the defects work line. And in Kanban, we have a very simple rule where we try to have the most important stuff at the top. So we give priority to work that comes in a higher swim lane. So this defect swim lane is seen as more critical work than the normal regular project work. Why? Because when we complete something, we can actually get paid. So the idea is now that that fix will flow through the stages of the workflow and go to finished. And when it goes to finished, we see on the project manager's workflow, the validator's workflow, we see the fix is now done. It has a green icon. Can complete the work and send the card into completed. And when that happens, now we have our first deliverable on the project done. Okay, what I've done now is I've taken you through an entire workflow just to give you a feeling for the 3 different levels, how each one of those levels has a workflow, and how cards and the status of the cards is indicated on that particular workflow and how it dynamically changes. So if you now just look at the bigger picture and ask yourself, okay, well, that is a single project. How would it look like if we just have a few more projects? Then I will just quickly have a look. Have I done everything? Yes, I've done everything. So I'm going to load a scenario now after 1 week. And while that happens, we have about a minute where we can just have a look. Are there any questions so far? Perhaps Mathias.
At this moment, there haven't been any question mark in the questions, but I also typed it just now. So if anybody of you has any question in between, even if it's a weird question regarding the simulation, regarding how this works and so on, feel free to ask it. There's no stupid question. And as I always say to listeners, to people I work with, if you've got a question, ask it, because there is a good chance, a 99% chance, that there will be others that have the same question and are fearful to ask it. So do ask it, put it into the questions area, and then we can chat it about that. At the moment, there haven't been any. So Mark, either you've killed everybody with your info, or you've been explaining so well that nobody has a question.
Or perhaps we're not at a stage where questions are relevant. Everybody's looking forward to the next one. Okay, so I've now loaded, that's one of the features of our simulation, as I said before. We can just load previous instances to talk about certain scenarios, problems, etc. I've loaded now the simulation 1 week in to give you a feeling for what happens when there are more cards, more projects. So 1 week in obviously is not a lot. So we now have 3 projects pulled in by 3 different project managers. And on Team Orange, you see there's a lot more work now. So of the deliverables, 5 of those deliverables have been started. Quite a few are blocked. And there is quite a lot of work items actually. Now, one of the nice things of this view is if all the teams use this way to visualize their work, then at program management level, it affords a very, very nice view over the entire picture. So here I've just now given insight into the deliverable views of the 3 teams. So Team Orange, you've already seen, that's the initiative workflow. So their deliverables workflow right at the top of the board. Since Team Purple and Team Yellow are exactly the same sort of setup in this case, it looks very similar. So it's the same workflow. It could be different workflows. So it doesn't have to be. In reality, obviously, a marketing project workflow looks very different than from a research engineering workflow. Now, in the simulation, they are all the same. And we can immediately, even after 1 week, start seeing some patterns emerging. We can see, for example, that just from the size, I mean, we know not much about the deliverables, how much work they contain, but let's assume that they're equal in size. We can see that the Orange has a lot more deliverables waiting for them, either in progress or waiting, than Purple, than Yellow. Yellow has only 3. So of all the project work now, 3 of those parts actually went to Yellow, and we can also see where in the process the work is. And how is that possible? Well, quite simply because just everybody makes sure that their individual work items, instead of keeping them in Excel or wherever, is updated usually once every day. If you do lots of work, then obviously you complete the subtask, you move the cards whenever something changes. But the advantage now to higher levels is that you always have a real-time view of what is actually going on in the organization. And that is pretty significant. So instead of having to ask anybody what's the current status, you can actually just look at the system and get a very good understanding. And you can then, oh, wow, yeah, quite a lot of blockers currently on this team. What is going on there? Can we perhaps help? What are the what are the things that you're battling with? We can also see that after a week, nothing has been completed in none of the individual boards. So neither at the project level, perhaps a week is just too early. Perhaps our projects are a little bit longer than a week. But
Mark, just a quick question whilst you're at this. Just at a blocker on work level, the question is it visible on the first level at the program management frame as well, if something has a blocker at the team level?
Okay, so good question. These blockers at the team level, they are at the work item level, and they are now dealt with by the team. If the team cannot resolve it, the team can now go and put a blocker on and say, whatever let's call it the generic blocker, and I put a reason on, and I add a blocker now to that particular card. Now this blocker is going to appear on all the linked cards. So everything connected with that particular project, these blockers are now showing. And to the high level, at the high level, it's also adding to the individual deliverables that now have blockers on. So yes, it depends on if you have on the work item level something that does not immediately filter up. It has to be, there's usually some sort of team or so that's going to work on it. And if that team cannot resolve it, puts it on, and then it goes up again to the next level. I'm going to remove that now. Don't want a blocker on there. In fact, I put it onto all of them. It's actually fine. I can leave it there. Was that the only question, Matthias?
Yeah, that was up to now the only question.
May I raise a question?
Yes, yeah, go for it.
I see on the left side of these cards or these work items the percentage, I think percentage of progress.
Yes.
How to judge this? Is there any, I guess, should not be an automatism behind.
Where does it come from?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, we don't really like that indicator. We are, as Kanban people, we believe in flow, and any sort of measurement like this is usually wrong. But still, everybody works like that. So, in principle, as the cards at a lowest level, so these cards, the work item level, they each have some sort of size. Could be hours, could be days, whatever you use as your size indicator, and they all roll up. They roll up to the deliverable level, and all these deliverables again roll up to the project level. And this is simply a percentage which is how many of these cards at the bottom, if we just take the cumulative size together that have been completed versus the total cards at the bottom. So 23%, a card that hasn't been completed is not going to be regarded. So there's no question about, okay, you're currently busy with this particular work item, how far are you? It's 0%. When that work item, or let's say that next work item moves to done, this work item and the size, so 3 work points now, they get added to that progress indicator. If you have not finished anything, like, okay, in fact, here we don't have any scenario like that. If you have started some work but have not finished a single work item, it's going to show 0%.
Yeah, Mark, you will see it one level down, you will see there are zeros still.
Yeah, so a couple of zeros, even though the work items themselves have been started on, but nothing has been finished, they're all at 0%. And as soon as some cards start being finished, like here, there's a card in the finish, this is in the archive column, which is also finished column, then it starts increasing. We actually see that these cards that have been finished, like I said, was in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's 8 cards, of which 4 are finished. And they happen to be the same size. So they could be different sizes, whatever, but they just happen to be the same size, which is why it's 50% completed. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Thanks.
So now, one other thing that I want to show you, I've just shown you the big view. You can now also go, let's say you are project manager 1, whatever your name is, and you say, I just want to see this particular project. You go and say, okay, filter on this project and show me the status of every single deliverable across my system. So if I'm not project manager 1, but I'm project manager 3, I filter and I see a black screen. And I see the project here in orange. Okay, there are 2 deliverables that have not yet been started, these 2 blue ones, and there are 2 deliverables, one in purple, one in yellow, have been started, they're in execution. In fact, yellow is already of the individual work items at the bottom, 2 have been completed, 1 has a blocker on. So that status comes as a benefit of using this Kanbanize software platform. You just put in the information and just keep things updated in the background. That's the visualization part and the focus. So I want to jump back again to the principles. I hope why does it take so long? Presentation has ended. Interesting.
It was just because your browser is ending it.
My browser is ending it. Multi-project, that's where we want to be. Weird, that's not the first time that Myra does it today. Myra had a massive breakdown a couple of days ago where I had to have been offline for something like 6 hours. And it seems that they have not yet fully recovered. Principles and artifacts too. Okay, so the visibility principle, I think we are getting a good idea now as to what it means to visualize your work, but not just any work. We want to focus on important work. And yes, projects are important, deliverables are important because we get our money. And of course, the work items that individuals do, which is also quite important to realize that this lowest level of work item, that's not the typical task that you find in so many task tracking tools. Because tasks could mean anything. In Kanban, we want the work items at the lowest level to still be meaningful work. So when you complete a work item, it actually means something. It's not just that some arbitrary task has been completed, it's some important step in the project has been completed. Okay, so those were the first two principles. If with just those two principles, we probably already get a lot of value, but not as much as we could be getting if we were now also looking at the next two principles. Let me just use the annotate. And so let's, oops, that's not what I wanted. So let's read this one. The continuous and balanced flow of value. Create a continuous and balanced flow of results to effectively manage the mix of customer needs, priorities, risks, and the system's ability to deliver value. Okay, again, a mouthful. What does it really mean to manage flow? I'll come back to that just now. The next one is we want to have feedback cycles. This is sort of the way how we do that. Very, very important is that we have short feedback loops so that we can collaboratively work with internal people and the customers, not only to keep the work flowing according to this principle, but also to make sure that we identify problems. Okay, what does that mean in practice? So I want to go back again and go to Team Orange board. In fact, I'm going to switch off my Zoom highlighting. And I'm going to show you the type of things that we would be looking at when we have, let's say, a weekly review cycle for teams. So the principle of these two practices is that, okay, we have some sort of static system. We just visualize what we already do. So we have not done anything magic. We just use a different way of actually indicating project status, deliverable status, work item status. In many instances, that is already existing, and we just visualize it differently. But we want to get to the point where we solve all these problems. That is really, I mean, we've seen all the problems that project management leaders have, and we've seen all the benefits, but just by visualizing, we're not going to solve any of those problems. So how are we going to solve them? And this is where, for example, a review meeting comes in very handy. So in here, I'm going to just shift perspective. I'm going to zoom out. I take the bird's eye view now of Team Orange. After the first week, they're now coming together. They don't really need to initially look at the detail level. In fact, we on purpose go to the Zoom level to make sure that people don't go into detail, and then ask the question and say, okay, well, look at this board and these two different workflows. Do we see flow? Is work flowing? And I just want to give you a minute to reflect on this. A simple question. Do you see flow? Okay, so let's have a look at the work item level. In a week, we see that there were 3 items there. In fact, the other item that I just pulled over, we actually completed 3 items in a week. We also notice that this team, and I'm going to tell you, it is a team in total of 5 people, 3 in execute and 2 in validate. They have pulled in, they've essentially started work on 26 work items, project work items. Probably because there's a big push in the organization. It's beginning of the year. We have to start all these projects, so we have to kick them off. And they know that they can start certain things, etc. So they start a lot. We can also see that quite a lot of these work items have immediate blockers on. So something occurred where they started work and they came to the point where they said, okay, I can't really continue working. And there's some work that is waiting to be worked on. And now we can have the question, okay, well, wow, that is a lot that you started, but isn't it more important to start finishing work? So as somebody once said, that you get paid for finishing work, not starting, even though we sometimes believe we get paid for starting work. And then we want to move these items over the goal line into that green mark. So what is it that we could be doing? And now the discussion starts. So you can now go back into the KPPM reference material, look at different practices if you have that particular problem. And quite probably somebody is going to suggest in the team, well, we need to limit the work in some way. There is just too much going on. May or may not happen. What you choose is not that important. As long as you reflect on this and say, okay, well, do we have flow? And because flow is such a fundamental principle in the KPPM framework, we start managing around flow. We want to see flow everywhere, which also at the work item level. And you will probably make a decision and say, well, if I need to run an experiment, if I need to change anything, this part I can change. If I look at the deliverable level, I also see that there's not really flow because I've just started work on 5 deliverables. That's a lot for only 5 people. I mean, it's essentially a project per person. Is that good? Is it not? Probably as an outsider say, well, it's not ideal, but this is just how the organization has been working. We still need to run a couple of more weeks to decide whether that is a problem, that there are so many in there or not. So wanting to change anything there would probably now be complicated. But at this level, this team is probably feeling overwhelmed at this moment in time. There's just too much. And by putting a work in progress limit for the team, let's say, oh, okay, you're so many people. Let's try let's try limiting the work in progress to, let's say, 10 items and see what happens in another week. Now, we call this an experiment. This is a change to our current system. Usually it's something small where we fiddle with the parameters. We fiddle with the policies that we currently have in our environment to see whether we get a better result. And in this case, we're looking for flow. If we come a week later and we find out that putting in this work in progress limit actually has generated so many problems, we drop it again. If we, however, come and say, wow, we have completed a lot of work, and just by the way, implementing work in progress limit of 10 in the system leads to, in the second week, for 18 items to be completed. And that's usually an eye-opener. Wow, we put a work in progress limit and suddenly we get stuff done. The team feels a lot better because we're not overburdened and they're getting some stuff done, which leads into that sort of positive mindset saying, wow, we actually did something and it created a result. And now after a week, you start asking the question, okay, well, what is the next problem that we now see to flow? And usually it's, okay, we put a work in progress limit there, but we continued planning. So work starts piling up in front of the team. It's again a problem. So again, the question comes up, what can we do about it? And this repeats again and again and again as the team always works on some problem they identified in their workflow. How exactly those experiments are determined and how they look, that varies from company to company, from team to team. It's never the same. There are certain patterns, and this is what KPPM gives you, quite a lot of patterns that you can think about in order to solve these problems. But there's no prescriptive model which says you have to do this, you have to do this. It's just multiple options that have worked in the past and that have led to certain good outcomes. So this now continues, and you can imagine this behavior, this environment now, where we have everybody at all levels of the organization, at all different workflows, even at the project management workflow, focusing on flow week after week after week. Now, at a team level, you probably meet weekly. At a project level, things tend to move slower. It might be every 2 weeks, might be every 4 weeks, which is a good cycle. Whatever is enough time so that you can see that there are changes, they can start thinking about flow. And all of the individual parts now do that. Now, what happens after you've done that for, let's say, 16 weeks? And for that, I'm going to load a next saved simulation to show you what could happen after 16 weeks if all the teams in the organization just have continued with that thinking. We focus on flow. What is currently the biggest problem? There's one experiment we run. And after we've run the experiment, we are going to observe again in a week's time, have we solved the problem or not? If good, they continue. If not good, they stop again. Matthias, are there any questions?
Nothing at the moment. So, but we can see if anybody wants to type a question, by all means, ask it. Does this make sense? Is there anything that's a bit unclear?
Okay, this now takes, so usually a minute that it takes before the new stuff is loaded. I'm going to close these workflows. I'm going to...
Good, everything is starting to load.
And why does this to and fro in the end that I still do not know? Just lacks jumping until it completes jumping. There we go. Stops jumping. Okay, this is now after 16 weeks. Before I explain to you what we now see, I want to show you something at a team level. So you've seen the cards that are just moving across the board. And you probably ask yourself, what is happening there? It looks like magic. It actually is not magic. It is, of course, a simulation that we are running in the background, but this simulation is using certain policies. And these policies, that is something that you discovered when you start a team on Kanban. You try and figure out how they're currently working. And once you understand how they're currently working, you can actually automate the decision-making processes behind how the team is working. So, for example, in this team, there's a pull policy for new work, and it could be either we prioritize starting work or prioritize finishing work. And what is the current policy that that team is actually enacting in their environment? And if you go through, there are quite a couple of things that you can think about, how you set your work in progress limits. And when you have discovered these policies, which exist in every single team out there at the moment, when you have discovered them, you can actually automate much of the decision-making process. And that is one of the ideas behind Kanban. We want to get away from just every single person making their own decisions to uncovering what are the real policies that lead to good results, and then codify them in a way in the Kanban board. So once we know what these policies are, we of course wouldn't put them here. That's not just for the purpose of simulation. We would put them into, the columns where they are relevant, like for example, busy planning. Okay, so busy planning has these policies, and we explain exactly, okay, when can a card go in there? What has the team discovered is a good way? It's usually 1 or 2 people who do it like that, and everybody else just follows along because it makes sense. So this is how we automate this, because we've uncovered those policies, which is also one of the guiding principles of Kanban in general. We want to uncover those policies, and as we go into that evolutionary improvement, we want to twist and change those policies in order to give better outcomes. So Kanban is not about, and even Kanban for PPM is not about focusing on the work items. I mean, you're the specialists, the teams are the specialists on the actual work that needs to get done, but to make sure that the system that we're using, the process that we're using in order to get the work done, works smoothly to ensure optimal results. Now, in the big picture, so we have, in 16 weeks, we have completed a total of 17 projects. So after the first 4 weeks, usually we complete 1 project, and that is when everybody goes in crisis mode. We're already now implementing KPPM. We're not getting more. We need to complete 60 projects. But then as the teams continue on this evolutionary cycle, the small changes, they start adding up. And what started out very small, of course, these are cumulative. So you make a small change now, this small change is going to be there for the duration of that team's working. And if you continue making these small changes, they will lead to really big results very fast. But you need to start with these small changes. And they're all driven by the teams. So here we have quite a lot of projects completed. In fact, if I just go and highlight all the experiments that have been done in these 16 weeks. So the team took the stance that every single time they run an experiment, they're going to document it. And it were changes like this poll policy, which I just now spoke about, which changed to focus on finishing instead of focus on starting. So that was a fairly significant change after 2 weeks of running. While running it, they also discovered that the team orange is a real bottleneck. So essentially, team orange gets about 2 times as much work as team yellow. So how do you start coordinating around that? And well, one of the easy ways to not continue loading team orange is to make sure that the other teams pull work which doesn't involve team orange. That only became apparent because we saw the big picture and we started seeing where the real constraint in the system is. So instead of continuing overloading orange, we could actually give work to other teams. We introduced system-wide prioritization. So system-wide prioritization where the team noticed, so in here, for example, we can go and put a priority marker on a card. So all cards by default are average, but we could go and say, okay, well, it needs to be critical. And initially, everybody puts their project in critical because the project managers, they may be incentivized by the number of projects they complete, and they work a little bit against each other. So everybody puts their projects on important, causing all the teams to be like completely confused with that Christmas tree like configuration. Like today, this is important, tomorrow that is important, and it continues to change. And they started realizing, you know what, that is actually completely counterintuitive. We need to have a central, consistent prioritization mechanism where we have one project that is high priority, one project that is critical priority, one project that is high priority, and all the others are just normal priorities. So if you have capacity, you're not currently working on the 2 highest priorities, then you work on the regular ones and you choose. Big change. Another change that was introduced that they found was one of the teams, Team Yellow, for example, they consistently had too little work for the number of people, and they started retraining individuals. Yes, it may have been from an R&D team to an engineering team, but there was still some work that could be actually reallocated and run experiments. See, okay, what could happen if we actually switch that person over to Orange? Would we improve the throughput? So you can see from the changes that these teams made, they were in the end like core changes for how the entire system works. But because they could see the problems unfolding in real time, it was relatively easy to have a discussion about what is causing a problem and what could we do to try and solve the problem. So it's not like somebody has an idea and says this is the problem and has no way to actually communicate why this is a problem, why they believe so. Now they have to convince them. And obviously the person who has the best convincing power is probably going to win that battle. Whereas here now it becomes a data-driven discussion. So what has led to all of this? So these projects, a lot of projects being completed. In fact, if I go down to the linked workflows and show what the teams have done, you can see that there's in this last column, you see the ready to archive, although was the number of deliverables completed for yellow was 22. For purple, it was 25. The number of deliverables for orange, even higher, 33. We can get a sense for that there's a good steady sense of deliverables being completed. Now, one advantage of that is if you have all these deliverables that you complete regularly, you can start making predictions. So if you know, for example, that these deliverables, we complete 2 or 3 a week, and that is a consistent output of Team Orange, then you can start making planning assumptions as to, okay, if I now pull in the next project, which project should I pull in? And what should be the loading on the individual team? So instead of asking people, okay, what is your wish date? When do you want something to be done? You can also look at your own internal capacity very simply and just look at how work is currently distributed and get a feeling for how much work is still waiting for Orange and when will they have capacity to start something new, because it's all flowing through all levels. Now, at that point, you're probably asking, okay, well, I see all of this, but is it translating into real business value? What am I getting out of it? And for that, I just want to quickly give you a squiz as to the metrics behind. So one of the beauties of a tool like Kanbanize or soon Businessmap is that there is a very, very capable metric system in the background. You can completely forget about that while you're setting up your system. I mean, you're visualizing your work, you're focusing on the really important things, you have your meetings, you continuously improve, forget about the metrics. But there comes a point where you actually want to start learning what is the data, the underlying data of my system. And then you go to Kanbanize and say, okay, show me the graphs, show me the data. So I'm not going to go into those details. I mean, I can talk for hours about what a cumulative flow diagram is and what we can see in such a graph and when things started improving. I mean, alone this graph can really keep us busy for an hour because there's so much information contained in it. I want to instead focus on a lot simpler graphs, metrics, which is the number of items completed for Team Orange. On the left-hand side in this view, you see the work items. So that's the lowest level of our hierarchy. And on the right-hand side, you see the deliverables. And how you read this throughput graph is you just look at a particular date. So let's say this date, that is now the 28th of March, 2023. And on this date, you will find that the certain items have been, so what is it, 28? 3 items have been completed. So you see that on the vertical axis, it says daily throughput. So 3 items have been completed. And in fact, we can see which items have been completed. Now, this graph together, this view of how many items we complete per day, allows us to calculate this line. You see this green line? This is an averaged line, running, how do you call it, the running average? And it shows us the 85 percentile line for all the work item cards. And we see initially it took, for 85% of all the cards at work item level, 1 day, or it took every day the system completed 1 card. Okay, so at that level, 1 card a day was completed, and we can see that something happened which increased the throughput of the team to 2 cards a day. So that's the lowest level. Work item, if I go back again to Team Orange, that's not the deliverable level, that's the work item level. So this is the actual work that the team is doing. So in the end, it came down to actually stabilized at 2 items per day, which means about 10 a week, which means about 40 a month, right? Is my math right? So about 40 a month. So 40 work items Team Orange does in a month. Now that's important information. If we now go 1 level higher and say, okay, let's look at the deliverables. Again, it's the same sort of, you read it in the same way. This is just looking at it on a week-by-week basis. So it tells us every week how many deliverables have been completed. And we see it varies, like all knowledge work does. Sometimes things take longer than expected, sometimes smaller, etc. So they're not the same size at all. But we still see this 85% line converging towards a weekly throughput of around 3 deliverables. Now that is very, very valuable when you do your initial project planning, knowing that the capacity of Team Orange, irrespective of the work that is being done, the way they currently work is they can complete 3 deliverables a week, which is 12 a month. So if you now come and you have lots of projects and you want about 30 deliverables from Team Orange, knowing that they can do 12 a month, you know that it will probably take around 3 months if that is the only work they do. And they continue working in the same way. Now, obviously, if new people come to the team or so, the dynamics will change. But it gives you that data back. Now, this is a throughput. One very interesting other phenomenon, which is actually quite difficult to explain, except the graph looks really beautiful. And when you understand what it does say in the end, you're astounded. So this looks at the amount of time that goes by from the time that a card comes into the system, so it's requested, there's some customer wanting something, until it gets completed. So here at a work item level, every single dot is a card that is completed. So if we go on this dot, it says on the 15th of February, we read that off on the horizontal axis. We see that this particular card has taken 29 days. That is now on the vertical axis. This is taken 29 days from the time that it's coming to the system until it's completed. And we can see that for all the cards that have been completed. And we notice that recently, so from about, March, middle of March, cards have started to move through the system a lot faster. Whereas before, and again, this green line shows us the 85 percentile line. So at this level, it says, okay, if somebody would have asked us how long does a work item take from the time that it comes into the system until Orange completes it, we would have said 44 days or less. And I'm 85% sure that that is the correct answer. But it was growing. We didn't really know. Perhaps a couple of weeks later, it would have been 50 days or 60 days. And because of all the changes that we introduced, we came to the point where actually we reduced the lead time dramatically, coming down to, okay, at a work item level of between 8 and 9 days. So let's say 9 days we are currently at. So every card at the work item level coming into the system, into the queue of Team Orange, now in the end, after 4 months, takes 8 days or less. Whereas previously it took longer and longer. We see the same dynamic at deliverable level. So this is now for the team, the project. It took longer and longer until the highest point, 73 days, more than 2 months. And then it started dropping. Like we see the projects recently completed, they have been in the system for far less. So that green line is probably still, as we continue running, they're probably going to still come down perhaps around 30 days. So instead of the project previously taking 2.5 months, perhaps 3 months, 4 months, etc., if we would have continued, we've been able to, from the time that we start, so the project request comes in and we say, yes, we are going to authorize this, now this can be worked on, and start completing that within a month's time. And this is a fairly big outcome. Now, hopefully, we're going to see that what happens on the project level. And here I just want to show you, so the highest level, the projects, this is where stuff moves slowly. We started building up the same level of workflow, essentially completing a project to a week. So 2 projects being completed a week, every week. And yes, it may vary, perhaps sometimes 1, but sometimes 3 as well, but it's probably going to stay around 2, which means the team in its current configuration, the entire team, that's now team orange, purple, and yellow, together with all the project management people, they have a capacity of completing close to 100 projects in a year if they work in this optimized way. Now, this brings me to the last principle. And in fact, I'm just going to spend a really short time. Somebody took over my presentation again.
Sorry, Mark.
The collaborative, purpose-driven culture, the last principle. Now, it says grow a culture of transparency, collaboration, outcome-oriented thinking, and continuous adaptation. And what the hell is that? Now, I think the very important part here is to first of all say, is there anything that is currently in our organization which is in conflict with this? So does our organization value transparency, or do we have laws that prevent us from putting stuff openly, where we cannot see who started something when, like many administrative organizations here in Germany, municipalities, etc., they have a problem with that. Transparency is a real challenge. Now, if you already have a starting condition where, okay, you are hindered by your environment to
Oops, somewhere we lost Mark there. Let's see if he's coming back in a moment. That was an interesting one. He's nearly finished there. I'll just quickly wait for him. Whilst we are at that, you would have seen if anybody needs to leave, there is already a feedback form link on that site. And yeah, the claim code will come later. I don't know, Mathias, if you already want to put in the claim code. There is 1 or 2 people that need to leave. I just want to also, one thing that I will share with you just now. Oh, now I've lost 2 panelists. Is everybody else still there? It looks like to me that I'm still here. Can somebody just post in the posts if I'm actually still live?
You are live,
Okay.
at least here.
Okay, you're back again.
I miss the chat
There's Mark again.
button. Yeah.
That was
Mark,
not
you're back?
intended. That was not intended. My internet connection broke down. I have no idea why. I'm now on my
Okay, but
phone.
you're anyway in your last 5 minutes here.
Yes, I'm in any case finished, which means I just wanted to conclude this thought. So this culture aspect, am I sharing again, Mathias?
Yes, you are sharing again.
Okay. So this culture aspect, you just need to make sure that there's nothing going against this in your organization. And then as you implement, as you focus on these other 4 principles, and they are very important, you start building up the confidence that this is in fact the culture that you need, that you want. And it can take months, can take years to establish that culture and to really bring it in a fundamental way in your organization. But this ultimately is what ensures that you will continuously get the value. So you don't start with it, but from a culture point of view, there needs to be nothing that is against this. And apart from that, it's just you implement the system, you visualize, focus on important things, and then it's about flow and continuously improving, like evolutionary. Small things done frequently going to lead to great results. Which brings me to my end and hopefully a lot of questions.
I don't know. We don't actually have any questions at this moment. If there's any questions, there was a question about the claim code. Yes, that is going to be looked at there. Yeah, Mark, if you can just, sorry, I'll stop then you can share this one that you're there at the moment with. The one thing is I'll just now also put 3 links in there. I want to then thank everybody. If anybody still has a question, you can still type it in if you want to. But other than that, I just wanted to say, first of all, thanks for all that are in the audience. And those of you that made time today, Mark, if you can make that a bit bigger, that would be great that you're sharing there. That would be awesome that we can have it in there. And especially those that sacrificed their Nicolaus talk. And a big thanks also to the PMI Germany chapter for hosting us. Secondly, you would have seen that I posted that survey. Please do a favor. As I said already, this session actually comes out of the last survey because people asked. We want to do regular events like that, really make them applicable to you. And lastly, you've seen the screenshot of the simulations before. If you're interested, have a look. To make it easy for you, on the left-hand side, you will see I created a redirect to our website, xuviate.com/PMIGC. That leads you to the English version, but there's also a German one. We do offer public simulations and have already scheduled 4 for January, 2 each in German and English. You can book them on the respective language site, and you will see at the top right that you can switch the language. Another option is to run a private simulation for your team. There you have to contact us directly if it interests you. But if you're not yet there, and I would guess that most of you are only here because you're interested and you really want to know what this KPPM is and you're not really sure, we actually want to give you the option of having a 60-minute free Zoom session where we assess your current situation together with you and explore whether Kanban could be something for you. So if you're at all interested, by all means, book a session with us on this xuviate.as.me/KPPM assessment. And if it is working, what a possible roadmap looks like, how do your tools fit in there? As we said, Businessmap is a tool that we are using. There are other tools out there to see how this works. How does Kanban work? Even if you're only interested, feel free to book a session with us and look at that. I think that's us at the moment. If there are no other questions, I don't know, Matthias, if you can still put the claim
just
code.
on behalf of PMI
You've done that. Yes, you put that in already.
Yeah,
so you would see
the
claim code is in there as well.
Also from my side, from PMI Germany chapter, thank you very much, Matthias and Mark. I'm astonished. I did not expect here such varieties and such a big board. What's great for me. And yes, I hope we can see us again soon here on another platform. The audience, the claim code, PDU claim code is visible in the chat. For any other questions, please contact me. Thanks very much.
Our pleasure.
Yes, thank you, and have a great Christmas time, everybody.
Yes.
And a great Nicolaus Tag.
Nicolaus evening. Okay, bye.